The Donald Trump story, unfolding long before his momentous entry into the Oval Office or his ascendance as a pivotal figure in 21st century politics, has its genesis in a realm far removed from the intricacies of global discourse and high-stakes diplomacy. It begins in New York City, a metropolis where ambition isn't a scarce trait, but a prerequisite for thriving. During the 1950s and 1960s, the city's iconic skyline was continually evolving, its towers reaching ever higher in a silent competition to brush the heavens. In this vibrant setting, amidst the towering steel structures and bustling sidewalks, a young boy absorbed vital lessons about the nature of power. Before we get into the main content, please consider subscribing to my channel, giving a like, leaving a comment, and sharing support me in bringing more great videos to you. Thank you so much. Born in 1946, Donald John Trump entered a family already deeply entrenched in the world of business, skillful negotiation, and the fluctuating dynamics of real estate. His father, Fred Trump, had an impressive track record of constructing homes and apartment buildings across Brooklyn and Queens, earning a reputation for unwavering discipline, operational efficiency, and relentless dedication. The young Donald observed, absorbed, and internalized this environment, a world where deals with a common currency and confidence held a value equivalent to capital. Yet his formative years were influenced not just by the world of commerce, but also by the prevailing spirit of post-war America, a nation characterized by optimism, continuous expansion, and an unwavering belief in its future prosperity. However, beneath this veneer of American confidence, the 1950s harbored underlying tensions, cultural shifts, technological advancements, and the nascent stirrings of global competition. These forces, though seemingly distant from Donald's immediate world, would eventually shape the America he would come to lead. At the age of 13, he was enrolled in the New York Military Academy. While some might view military school as a constraint, for him, it provided structure and discipline. In many ways, it served as the initial setting where he was compelled to channel his energies into leadership. He honed his abilities to command, compete, and assert himself, skills that would resurface decades later on the political stage. By the early 1970s, Donald Trump ventured into the real estate sector during a period of significant transformation for the United States. Urban centers grappled with economic downturns, escalating crime rates, and deteriorating infrastructure. Many businesses retreated from these urban areas, but Donald, still in his 20s, recognized the potential within this decline. He boldly entered Manhattan, an area his father hadn't explored, and began navigating a complex world populated by financiers, architects, journalists, and political figures. The 1980s marked his ascent. Trump Tower, with its gleaming reflective bronze facade, became a landmark on Fifth Avenue, instantly capturing the attention of passers-by. It was more than just a building. It was a bold statement of ambition and success. Luxury hotels, casinos, and lucrative branding deals soon followed. His name began to adorn skylines, book covers, and eventually television screens. For many, he evolved into a symbol, representing success, extravagance, and sometimes controversy, but always embodying boldness. Throughout these years, Trump's distinctive personality, confident, direct, and unfiltered, became an integral part of his public persona. He wasn't a seasoned politician. Rather, he was a businessman operating in a country captivated by wealth and potential for reinvention. His media appearances seamlessly blended entertainment and business, making him instantly recognizable even to those with limited understanding of finance or real estate. However, history often has a way of reshaping even the most unconventional trajectories. As the United States entered the 2000s, significant economic and political transformations spurred fresh debates nationwide. Globalization accelerated, factories shuttered, new industries emerged, and cultural divides deepened. Many Americans felt marginalized, unheard, or uncertain about the future. Public trust in institutions waned, and political discourse grew increasingly polarized. Donald Trump, once primarily known as a businessman detached from Washington's established norms, began voicing his opinions on political matters. He offered his perspectives on trade, job creation, immigration, and foreign policy, speaking not as a seasoned statesman, but as a private citizen with strong views on America's direction. His pronouncements were forthright, sometimes provocative, but always distinctively his own. By the early 2010s, Trump had evolved from a mere public figure into a powerful voice, one that resonated with Americans disillusioned by economic shifts, political gridlock, or cultural changes. Although his path into politics was unconventional, the sentiments driving it were widespread. Across the nation, many people were grappling with similar questions. What had become American manufacturing? Why were wages stagnating? Why did Washington seem so disconnected from everyday life? In 2015, he announced his candidacy for president, setting the stage for a political narrative unlike any other in modern American history. Supporters hailed him as a challenger to a system they believed had failed them. Critics questioned his methods and his rhetoric. Regardless of perspective, it was undeniable that he had tapped into a powerful undercurrent that had been building for years within the American psyche. The 2016 election emerged as a pivotal moment, not only for Donald Trump, but for the United States and the world. Suddenly, a businessman celebrated for his skyscrapers, reality television presence, and bold pronouncements was entrusted with the responsibilities of global leadership. The presidency transformed him, and he, in turn, reshaped the political dialogue in ways that would reverberate far beyond Washington. However, part one of the story does not dwell on the presidency itself. Instead, it traces a long and winding road that led to it, the decades of ambition, the cultural shifts within America, the growing influence of media, and the economic transformations that redefine people's expectations. Part one tells the story of how Donald Trump became a figure who would ultimately occupy the most powerful office in the world. As darkness descends upon Manhattan, its towers glowing like constellations crafted from steel and ambition, the image of a young boy who once walked these streets returns to mind. A boy who witnessed buildings rise, a young man who sought opportunities where others saw only decline, a public figure shaped by the rhythm of New York, and ultimately, a future president whose journey began long before politics beckoned. This is where part one concludes. In the years preceding the presidency, in the unfolding of an American narrative shaped by business, media, and the evolving identity of a nation, the next part will follow him into Washington, delving into policymaking, governance, and the global spotlight that comes with holding the highest office in the United States. When Donald Trump entered the White House in January 2017, the atmosphere in Washington shifted instantly. The marble halls, known for their quiet formality and practiced restraint, now hosted a president whose style was anything but traditional. For decades, analysts had studied political patterns, how presidents built coalitions, how they spoke, how they balanced diplomacy and policy. But Trump arrived not as a product of Washington, but as an outsider who viewed the world through the lens of deals, negotiations, and instincts sharpened beyond political convention. His presidency began at a moment when the United States was deeply divided, economically, culturally, and politically. Entire regions felt disconnected from the prosperity visible in coastal cities. Global competition, especially from China, had redefined manufacturing, technology, and trade. These shifts shaped not only America's economy, but its sense of identity. Trump stepped into this landscape with a message that resonated with millions, a promise to restore American industry, renegotiate global relationships, and challenge the assumptions of political elites. His supporters saw him as a disruption to a system that had grown stagnant. His critics viewed him as unpredictable. Yet from his perspective, unpredictability was a strategy, a way to reset expectations and shift the negotiation table. In his early months, Trump focused heavily on economic policy. He believed that America's strength began at home, with factories, industries, and jobs. His administration emphasized deregulation, tax restructuring, and a push to revive domestic production. These policies sparked debates across the country. Supporters in industrial regions spoke of renewed optimism. Critics warned about long-term consequences. Still, the central theme was clear. Trump saw economic power as the foundation of national strength. Alongside economic reforms came a shift in trade policy. Trump had long argued that America's trade agreements were imbalanced, and now, from the Oval Office, he had the authority to renegotiate them. NAFTA, decades old and deeply intertwined with North American commerce, was reopened and reshaped into the USMCA. Tensions with China intensified, leading to tariffs, counter-tariffs, and a long, complex negotiation process. Trump described these actions not as conflict, but as leverage, pressure designed to secure better terms for American workers and companies. Meanwhile, on the global stage, his approach diverged sharply from past administrations. He questioned international agreements, challenged traditional alliances, and emphasized the concept of America first, not as isolationism, but as prioritizing national interests in every diplomatic exchange. He expected allies to increase their defense contributions and argued that global institutions needed reform. His tone was direct, sometimes confrontational, and unlike the cautious language often preferred in diplomacy. Inside the United States, his presidency reshaped public conversation in ways few could have predicted. Social media, which had already transformed communication, became his immediate platform, a space where policy announcements, reactions, and commentary flowed in real time. Supporters saw this as unprecedented transparency. Opponents viewed it as unconventional and disruptive. But regardless of interpretation, his communication style rewrote expectations about how a modern president could speak to the world. During this period, he also addressed issues long debated in American politics: immigration reform, border security, and national identity. These topics carried emotional weight, drawing strong opinions from both sides. For Trump, these policies reflected his broader worldview, that a nation must control its borders to maintain sovereignty and stability. For critics, the approach raised humanitarian and ethical concerns. The debates became defining moments of his presidency, revealing the deep cultural complexities within American society. In foreign policy, Trump's perspective was shaped by the belief that America had been overly generous or overly patient in past decades. He questioned alliances, such as NATO, approached Middle East diplomacy through transactional logic, and emphasized bilateral negotiations over multilateral frameworks. His administration facilitated agreements between Israel and several Arab states, historic steps that surprised many observers who had grown accustomed to stalemate in the region. Trump supporters viewed these achievements as evidence of his unconventional effectiveness. Critics argued that the long-term impact remained uncertain. Meanwhile, at home, economic indicators fluctuated. Some sectors grew, others remained fragile. The stock market performed strongly, yet anxiety about automation and globalization persisted. Rural and urban America continued to diverge in outlook, values, and expectations. Through all of this, Trump maintained a narrative focused on national revival, on the belief that America should reclaim manufacturing, strengthen borders, and redefine its relationships abroad. In 2020, an unforeseen crisis emerged, a global pandemic that tested not only the United States but every nation on Earth. COVID-19 reshaped daily life, strained hospitals, suspended travel, and disrupted the global economy. For Trump, the pandemic became a defining challenge of his presidency. His administration mobilized resources, accelerated vaccine development through Operation Warp Speed, and worked to stabilize essential industries. But the crisis also deepened political tensions, shaped public discourse, and exposed vulnerabilities within global systems. That same year, the United States entered another intense election cycle. The political climate was charged, shaped by the pandemic, protests, economic uncertainty, and deep ideological divides. As votes were counted and legal battles unfolded, the transition of power became one of the most closely watched moments in modern American history. In January 2021, Trump left office, but his influence on politics, on party dynamics, and on national identity continued. Yet Part 2 does not pause to analyze political outcomes. Instead, it observes the arc of his presidency through the lens of policy, history, and emotional rhythm of a nation navigating change. Trump's leadership, whether praised or criticized, marked a turning point, a shift in how political messages were delivered, how negotiations were conducted, and how the United States perceived its place in the world. As Part 2 closes, the scene shifts once more. Trump has left the White House, but he has not left public life. His presence remains powerful, his supporters loyal, and his future uncertain. Part 3 will explore the period after his presidency, how he shaped the political landscape, how he remained an influential figure, and how the world responded to the evolving story of a former president who continues to stand at the center of global attention. When Donald Trump left the White House in January 2021, the transition marked the end of an extraordinary 4-year chapter, but it did not close the story. For most former presidents, life after Washington becomes quieter. Memoirs, speeches, foundations, and occasional appearances on the global stage. But Trump departed Washington with something different, an energized base, a reshaped political party, and lingering questions about America's direction. The months that followed were turbulent. The nation was processing a pandemic, economic uncertainty, and deep political fractures. Trump, instead of retreating into private life, remained a central figure in American discourse. His supporters saw him as a voice opposing what they believed were structural problems in government. His critics believed the political climate he influenced would shape the United States for years. Whatever perspective, one reality was clear. Trump was not stepping away from politics. In the early months of 2021, analysts predicted that his influence would fade with time, but the opposite occurred. The political movement surrounding Trump grew larger, more organized, and more confident. Conferences, rallies, and local gatherings kept his message alive, while his endorsements in congressional and gubernatorial races demonstrated he still had the ability to shape careers, and in some cases, the direction of the Republican Party itself. Behind the scenes, debates unfolded across the country. Was Trump a temporary figure or a long-term force? Would the Republican Party evolve past him or continue to mirror his style? These questions weren't just about policy. They reflected larger anxieties about identity, globalization, and the shifting landscape of American society. Meanwhile, the world was undergoing rapid change. Technology accelerated. Diplomacy evolved. New challenges, global supply chain strains, rising tensions in Europe, growing competition between major powers, reshaped international discussions. Even outside office, Trump was referenced frequently in global debates. World leaders analyzed his previous policies to understand America's future direction. Some nations viewed his presidency as a sign of emerging national conservatism. Others saw it as an unpredictable chapter in American politics. Yet all acknowledged one truth. Trump had redefined how the United States interacted with the world. Throughout 2022 and 2023, Trump continued commenting on domestic and international issues. His speeches often blended criticism of economic policy, concerns about border security, skepticism about globalization, and repeated calls for American manufacturing revival. To supporters, his message felt like a continuation of promises made in 2016. To observers, it was a persistence of a political figure unwilling to leave the national stage. At the same time, the Republican Party itself was shifting. Younger leaders emerged, some aligning with Trump's worldview, others attempting to chart new paths. But even those who diverged from Trump's style could not ignore his influence. Polls consistently showed that Trump remained one of the most recognized and polarizing figures in modern American politics. In 2023, conversations about a potential comeback intensified. Many Americans had strong opinions, supportive or critical, but few were indifferent. Trump's presence in the public sphere kept political energy high across all sides of the spectrum. Commentators debated whether the U.S. was entering a new era in which former presidents could reemerge as active political contenders, something nearly unprecedented in the modern era. Meanwhile, the international environment grew increasingly uncertain. Tensions in Eastern Europe escalated. Asia experienced its own power shifts, and global inflation disrupted economies. Nations around the world watched U.S. politics closely, understanding that the next American leader would shape alliances, trade, and global stability. In diplomatic circles, the question resurfaced repeatedly. Would Donald Trump return to the White House? By late 2023, Trump's influence was not merely theoretical, it was structural. His endorsements shaped primaries. His rallies drew large crowds. His presence dominated news cycles. And as the 2024 election approached, Trump once again became a central figure in national conversation. The United States entered the election year divided yet engaged, with debates about economy, immigration, technology, and global competition dominating the landscape. Trump's campaign centered on themes familiar to his supporters: restoring economic strength, reshaping trade relations, and prioritizing domestic manufacturing. Critics raised concerns about polarization, institutional norms, and foreign policy unpredictability. Supporters believed he would bring firm leadership in a fractured world. As votes were cast and counted in 2024, global attention intensified. International observers recognized that American elections carried consequences far beyond U.S. borders. The result, when announced, marked a historic moment. Donald Trump, after leaving office in 2021, returned to presidency in 2025. Only one other president in U.S. history had ever served non-consecutive terms, making Trump's comeback an event of significant historical weight. Part 3 pauses here, not to assess a victory, but to reflect on the road that led to this moment. It is a story of a former president who refused to fade, of shifting political tides, and of a world grappling with uncertainty. As Part 3 concludes, the scene transitions toward 2025, a year in which Trump returns to the Oval Office, this time carrying the experience of a previous term, the momentum of a powerful political movement, and the expectations of an America navigating one of the most complex global landscapes in modern history. The next chapter will explore how Trump approached his second presidency, how the global environment shaped his decisions, and how history began to view a leader returning to power in an era defined by both opportunity and volatility. When Donald Trump returned to the White House in January 2025, he entered not as the outsider he once was, but as a figure carrying the weight of experience, both the accomplishments and the controversies of a previous term. The Oval Office was familiar, yet the world around it had changed dramatically. Global tensions were sharper, economies more fragile, and technological shifts faster than at any point in modern history. Trump's second presidency began in a landscape that demanded caution, decisiveness, and understanding of how interconnected every decision had become. On his first mornings back in Washington, Trump often stood before the windows of the West Wing, looking out at a Capitol that seemed both familiar and transformed. The debates, expectations, and pressures of the moment were larger than those he had faced before. America was emerging from years of uncertainty, from economic swings, social divisions, and shifting international alliances. And now, once again, he was positioned at the center of a world that watched closely. One of Trump's earliest priorities was the economy. The global financial system had grown unstable due to inflationary waves, energy disruptions, and changing supply chains. For Trump, economic policy was not just a matter of growth. It was a foundation of American strength. He emphasized manufacturing revival, energy expansion, and reducing dependence on foreign supply networks. In speeches, he often returned to the same sentiment. A strong nation must build and produce within its own borders. Factories in the Midwest, ports along the East Coast, and technology hubs in the South began to feel the renewed push for domestic investment. Some sectors responded quickly, energized by new incentives. Others faced challenges adapting to the shifting landscape. Economists debated the outcomes, but the direction was clear. Trump aimed to position America as a nation less vulnerable to global volatility. Meanwhile, the world beyond America's borders was moving restlessly. In Europe, tensions simmered around security and energy dependence. In Asia, competition between major powers intensified. The Middle East experienced both breakthroughs and new conflicts. Trump's foreign policy approach, shaped by past experience, focused on leverage, negotiating from strength, questioning long-standing assumptions, and evaluating every alliance through the lens of national interest. Many leaders around the world approached Trump's second presidency with caution, but also with recognition. They had seen his style before, direct, transactional, and driven by outcomes rather than tradition. Diplomatic meetings shifted in tone. Some were tougher, sharper. Others became simpler, less ceremony, more negotiation. Trump saw international affairs as a series of interlocking deals, each connected to America's economic and security footing. One of the central themes of this period was strategic competition. Technology, once a quiet domain of engineers and researchers, had become a geopolitical battlefield. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, rare earth minerals, and cybersecurity now influenced the balance of global power. Trump's administration took these challenges seriously, pushing for investment in critical industries, securing supply chains, and reevaluating partnerships with technological implications. His advisors often spoke of future-proofing America, building resilience in an age where innovation determined national strength. While foreign policy demanded attention, the domestic landscape was equally complex. America remained divided, politically, culturally, geographically. Trump's return to the presidency reignited debates across the country. Supporters expected strong leadership and bold decisions. Opponents questioned the direction the nation was taking. Amid these contrasts, Trump spoke frequently about restoring confidence in the American identity, an idea rooted in sovereignty, economic independence, and national resilience. Cultural tensions, long simmering beneath the surface, found new expression in protests, debates, and political commentary. Trump's presence amplified discussions about immigration, education, and federal authority. He responded in familiar ways: firm rhetoric, rapid communication, direct engagement with supporters. Whether praise or criticize, his leadership style continued to shape the national conversation. Despite the noise of domestic disputes, the responsibilities of the presidency required Trump to look outward. Crises developed unexpectedly. Sudden geopolitical shifts, energy disruptions, emerging technologies that challenged traditional regulation. In these moments, Trump drew heavily on instinct and experience. He preferred decisive action to prolonged deliberation and saw hesitation as a weakness in a fast-moving world. In global forums, Trump emphasized themes he had long repeated. Nations must define their own paths. Alliances must be fair. Peace must be built through strength. His speeches carried a tone both familiar and sharpened by time. Less about challenging the system and more about renegotiating America's role within it. Meanwhile, the international view of America continued to evolve. Some nations saw the United States as reasserting itself forcefully. Others viewed the shift with concern. Yet nearly all agreed on one point: America's moves under Trump were impossible to ignore. Decisions in Washington influenced prices, markets, and diplomatic strategies thousands of miles away. In private moments, rare but meaningful, Trump occasionally reflected on the unusual path that had led him back to the presidency. Few leaders in history had returned to power after losing it. Fewer still did so in a world as fractured and accelerated as the 2020s. His journey had been shaped by public support, political conflict, and global uncertainty. Now, the challenge was to govern with the awareness that every decision, small or large, contributed to the historical narrative of a nation. As Part 4 approaches its final scenes, the atmosphere is one of tension and momentum. Trump's second presidency moves deeper into uncharted territory, an era shaped by economic recalibration, global competition, and evolving national identity. The story now prepares to enter its last chapter. Part 5 will follow the unfolding consequences of Trump's decisions, the global realignments taking place around America, and the long-term questions that define his role in one of the most transformative periods of modern history. As Donald Trump moved deeper into his second term, the rhythms of the presidency shifted once more. The early urgency of returning to power gradually blended into the steadier pulse of governance. Yet, nothing about the world in 2026 and the years that followed resembled stability. The international environment had become a landscape defined by rapid change, new alliances, and unpredictable tensions. Trump, in the center of this evolving picture, was forced to navigate challenges that demanded both instinct and calculation. The United States, during this period, faced an array of simultaneous pressures: restructuring global trade, monitoring emerging technologies, adjusting to new power dynamics in Asia and Europe, and managing domestic divisions that had not faded with time. Trump approached these challenges with a style he had cultivated over decades: direct, strategic, sometimes confrontational, but consistently anchored in the belief that American strength must guide American policy. One of the defining themes of this era was economic recalibration. By mid-2026, global markets were adjusting to transformations in energy, manufacturing, and digital industries. Automation expanded faster than predicted. Artificial intelligence reshaped private. Here's the refined translation, incorporating interpretation, clarification, and light expansion, tailored for a U.S. audience. The performance of both private and public sectors experienced fluctuations, while commodity prices exhibited unpredictable volatility. The Trump administration intensified its efforts to safeguard domestic industries, strengthen supply chain independence, and pursue trade agreements that prioritize American interests. The industrial heartland of the Midwest and the southern states presented a mixed picture. Certain sectors saw revitalization, marked by the opening of new facilities and incentive programs designed to encourage expansion among established manufacturers. However, other industries face significant challenges in keeping pace with global technological advancements. Economists engage in debates regarding the long-term repercussions of these policies, but for everyday workers, the impact was measured by immediate realities: wages, employment prospects, and the overall economic stability of their communities. Concurrently, foreign policy entered a pivotal stage. Trump's emphasis on transactional diplomacy encountered a complex global landscape where symbolic gestures and strategic considerations often held equal importance. Relations with Europe oscillated between periods of cooperation and episodes of tension. Engagements with Asia remained crucial, especially as nations in the region navigated the growing competition between major global powers. The Indo-Pacific region emerged as a focal point for diplomatic negotiations, economic rivalry, and evolving security concerns. Trump consistently argued that America needed to reassess its role within international institutions. He advocated for reforms within trade organizations, questioned long-standing financial commitments to international bodies, and called for alliances that reflected contemporary geopolitical realities rather than the outdated frameworks of the Cold War era. Some allies readily adapted to these new expectations. Others grappled with uncertainty, unsure whether America's evolving role represented a temporary adjustment or a fundamental and permanent shift in the patterns of global leadership. Against the backdrop of these international endeavors, the domestic atmosphere remained sharply polarized. The American political environment in the late 2020s was characterized by intense cultural debates, media fragmentation, and heightened public engagement. Trump's speeches, delivered at campaign rallies, international summits, and official addresses, maintained a tone of unwavering resolve and urgency. He reiterated core themes of national sovereignty, fair trade practices, economic resilience, and renewed national confidence. Supporters found clarity and conviction in his message, while critics perceive it as rigid and inflexible. Regardless, his ability to command attention was undeniable. In Washington, policy negotiations continued to reflect the prevailing divisions. Some legislative measures advanced swiftly due to strong executive influence, while other initiatives became mired in partisan gridlock. Trump's relationship with Congress remained intricate, influenced by shifting alliances and diverging strategic priorities. Nevertheless, the presidency, with its inherent powers, continued to set the overall national direction. Crises arose frequently and from diverse sources: energy disruptions in one part of the world, technological disputes in another, and unexpected diplomatic incidents that demanded immediate responses from the White House. Trump approached each situation with his characteristic blend of instinct and assertiveness. Advisors debated strategies. Opponents voiced criticism. Supporters applauded decisive action. The world observed. As months turned into years, a more comprehensive historical perspective began to emerge regarding Trump's second presidency. Scholars, journalists, and international observers meticulously analyzed his decisions to determine their long-term impact on the decades to come. They debated his influence on American institutions, leadership norms, and the alignment of geopolitical forces. Some viewed this period as a necessary recalibration. Others interpreted it as a radical departure from established norms and practices. Yet for Trump himself, the presidency was never merely an abstract academic subject. It was a daily exercise in responsibility, shaped by intuition, the demands of a restless populace, and the pressures of global expectations. In moments of private reflection, he sometimes contemplated the extraordinary trajectory of his political career, his rise in the world of business, his unexpected entry into politics, his tenure as president, his electoral defeat, and then his unprecedented return to power. On certain evenings, he remained in the Oval Office long after meetings had concluded, the corridors quiet, the desk illuminated by the soft glow of lamps. Outside, the capital city shimmered faintly in the night. Inside, he reviewed reports, evaluated decisions, or simply absorbed the weight of leading a nation that remained deeply influential but was increasingly challenged by the shifting dynamics of the global landscape. The world around him continued its relentless evolution. Major global powers adjusted their strategies. Developing nations sought new partnerships. International organizations redefined their core missions. And America, under Trump's leadership, remained a central force in shaping this intricate and ever-changing environment. Toward the latter part of his second term, observers noted a significant trend. Trump's policies, whether in trade, energy, technology, or security, had reshaped not only America's standing, but also the architecture of the international system itself. Markets adapted to new economic realities. Diplomatic alliances realigned in response to emerging priorities. Nations reassessed their positions in a world where U.S. leadership had become more conditional, more strategic, and more assertively transactional. As his second term drew to a close, the question of legacy arose with increasing frequency. Not the immediate political legacy debated daily on television, but the enduring historical legacy, the long-term consequences of decisions made during an era defined by uncertainty, rapid change, and global interdependence. Part 5 concludes here, not to provide closure to a political narrative, but to acknowledge the sheer scope and magnitude of the story. Trump's journey, from businessman to politician, from president to former president and back to the Oval Office, had unfolded across decades of profound economic transformation, cultural shifts, and international upheaval. His policies left indelible marks on global trade, diplomacy, and domestic political identity. The narrative ends not with a sense of finality, but with an awareness of continuity. History rarely concludes neatly at the end of a political term. The consequences of leadership, whether praised or criticized, beneficial or detrimental, resonate long after the final speech is delivered, and the world, constantly in motion, continues to adapt to the choices made by those who shape its course.